And we're driving out west out of Phoenix on I-10, and all around us is just barren, arid desert. And as we come up over the top of the road, off in the distance, we see green fields. I mean, across almost the entire horizon, fields of alfalfa, hay, essentially, being grown right there in the desert.
I have lived in Paz County for pretty much 10 years, but my family has lived here since the early 60s. There was a lot of agriculture activity back then. That's where a lot of families did have jobs back then. My grandparents moved here to help with cotton farms, and now other large farming companies, corporate farming, have been the major change. You know, it's changed the tapestry around here.
The largest dairy company in the Middle East is based in Saudi Arabia. It's El Morai, and that's the company that we found in the Arizona desert. When the Saudis bought the farm, there was a variety of crops being grown there. They converted it all to hay, essentially the most water-intensive crop they could convert it to. In a desert, you have sunshine and warm temperatures nearly all year long, meaning that you can be growing hay, compressing it, shipping it back to Saudi Arabia nearly 12 months of the year. The downside of that is it means that you're pumping water up from the aquifer for nearly 12 months of the year.
When we talk about aquifers, we're talking about these ancient reserves of water that have had a sort of shell above them, and they don't get extracted unless a very deep well is dug.
There were 15 groundwater wells on that property, each capable of pumping up about 1 billion gallons of water a year. But that wasn't enough. They've now applied for and received permits to put in 8 additional groundwater wells.
When we talk about non-recharging groundwater supplies, what we're really talking about typically in Arizona is either tapping into those fossil reserves that were put there tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, and they're not being recharged at all, or we're talking about withdrawing water that has been put there through more recent precipitation, but we take it out at a much faster rate than it's replenished because we just don't get that much rain here.
Good evening. The Middle East War produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories. If the Arab countries keep that pledge, it would reduce their production by almost 50% in 1 year.
1973, that was the year of the quadrupling of oil prices. It was the oil embargo. Saudis became concerned over retaliation by the West, retaliation against the steep increase in oil prices and the oil embargo through the boycott of foodstuffs. You boycotted us on oil, we're going to boycott you on wheat. Saudi Arabia launched the program to reach food independence.
The government began heavily subsidizing farmers and basically allowed these farmers to pump up Saudi Arabia's own groundwater. It got so expansive that they were actually exporting crops from this water-deprived, arid nation.
Saudi Arabia became the 6th largest wheat exporter in the world.
But that could only last so long. And after a few decades of it, their groundwater had depleted to a point where they realized that was it.
I estimated that in those 20 years, Saudi Arabia pumped out of its aquifers 300 billion cubic meters of water. There's little surprise here, therefore, that the government decided that no more, because the aquifers were ruined. They ran out of water in Saudi Arabia, so they come now to Arizona. There is no alternative. Al-Mara'i is an established company, deeply rooted in the country. It has 160,000 heads of cows, but it has to import now all its animal feed. On the one hand, I'm sympathetic to Al-Mara'i. On the other hand, I feel sorry for Arizona when they ship alfalfa, they are shipping their water away.
Most of La Paz County is not in a regulated area. What does that mean? It means that anybody can come in, drill a well of any size, and pump to any depth and pump as much as they want. And it doesn't matter if they affect existing users. That's what the law is. What La Paz County is worried about is that their groundwater supplies will be mined into extinction.
As groundwater gets depleted, the level of the groundwater table, the surface of that groundwater, is going to drop. And it'll get lower and lower and lower. And so if this is a well, it only goes down so deep. As the groundwater drops, at some point the well runs dry. So what happens is that people who have been there a long time, who have shallower wells, those wells have always worked for those people, eventually those wells can start running dry.
I'm just curious what they're going to kick the farmers out or what?
That's not the intent.
Well, I'm hearing that there's people from out of country that bought our property around here, growing the alfalfa, which takes more water than anything, especially in hot climate like this. They've already pumped their area in Saudi Arabia or wherever they're from, but now they're over here doing the same to our country.
I'm amazed that these large agricultural concerns were allowed to drill wells when the state had already seen we were having a problem here. The foreign entities that have bought land here and drilled wells and are pumping a lot of water out of the valley for a product that's being shipped out of the country.
The deeper pockets and the bigger agricultural interests will draw down the groundwater using deep, big wells, and they will dry up their neighbors' wells. So that's a problem, and that can lead to finger pointing and blame, and some of it very valid.
There's some sort of blame assigned to the local agricultural and farming community. And so, you know, those are fears, but we're not sure that those are well-grounded fears. But obviously there is an issue that people are dealing with, local residents who are seeing issues with their wells that they personally use. But whether or not it's up to agriculture or farming as being the culprit, I don't think that's the case.
We've had 2 wells go dry. In the last 4 years, we've lost 50 feet of water in our well.
I'm Mary Goodman. This is my husband, Bill. We moved here in 1999, purchased this property. And before that, we lived and worked in California. I was a registered nurse, and my husband, Bill, was a mechanic down in the harbor. We wanted a place where he could fly a small experimental airplane. We're really concerned about the water usage in the area. Wells are going dry all over the valley, and yet new ones are being put in. They've put alfalfa farms near us. It's just kind of scary.
We've had to replace 2 wells. This well had to be re-drilled. The well over there, we had to put a new well in. That well was probably over $20,000.
The new wells the farmers are putting in, usually they're at 1,000 feet, we've heard. They're going down to 11, 12, 1,300 feet now. If they're that deep and pulling water out, they can keep pulling it out. We're at 680 over here, rock bottom, and the water goes down below that, we have no water. We're retired and on a limited income, and what little savings we have are starting to disappear from having to do wells.
It's almost impossible to manage groundwater without some sort of regulation. And without that, I don't see a lot of hope for those areas, because there's very little a local entity can do to stop somebody from pumping groundwater when state law permits it.
I don't know what they're going to need to do on that. I sure don't want them to come and regulate the water I pump for my usage.
Will we be metered? Will we be subject to fees for minimal usage we may never meet?
They need some regulation on the water. I'm not sure how to do it, but I don't think it's right that people from another country can come over here and use our resources when they've depleted theirs.
I would urge you to put a moratorium on the amount of water and the amount of wells that they can drill in that area until we get this process resolved.
We mentioned today that we need to update our data, especially our agricultural data, see what the pumping levels are now. And you need the background data to make that model robust and make the results of that model meaningful. I
applaud the people that are doing the water studies, but if they're going to wait and have a 5-year study, I think by the time 5 years is up, there's going to be a definite water shortage in this area, more so than now. So I'm just not sure what's going to happen. Where can we go and have the lifestyle we have here?
But I think the reality that has hit us in the face is that someone with sufficient money can buy a large tract of land and set about withdrawing as much water as they want to grow crops at essentially the expense of people who were already in the community. The other major impact from groundwater withdrawals that people talk about is subsidence, where the land drops and there are cracks in the land.
Arizona, though, is unique. It doesn't just sink. Because of the geology there, it does something frankly remarkable. It creates fissures.
One big area that we did have an impact from subsidence is in the canal system. It's in the Scottsdale, Northeast Phoenix section. For many years before CEP started delivering water to the cities, Scottsdale and Phoenix had well fields over in that area, and they pumped a lot of groundwater for 20, 30 years as the population grew. So that, along with some other private wells, led to a kind of an isolated area of subsidence. About a 10-mile section of the canal dropped about a foot and a half in some places. But what it did is it created a lower area where it impacted our conveyance capacity of water and reduced our capacity in the summertime when we had our large demands and we needed more water through the area. The cost probably about $3.5 million to $4 million to mitigate that. Subsidence is irreversible. So once it's settled and consolidated, you can't pump it back up and relift it. You can only just stop it and stabilize it at that point.
Let's take a look at Riesenberg's Plain. If the Riesenberg's Plain drops, the CAP has a potential to crack because it runs right through the Riesenberg's Plain. Talk about a loss. We need our drinking water. That is a priority.
They're pumping groundwater, which are, it's unregulated out in that area, and they can do as much as they want. We understand that. That's what they need to do for their farming operation. We're aware of it, and we're watching it, monitoring it.
There is a balance that needs to be struck. I think everyone agrees on that. I think the residents of La Paz agree that farming brings jobs, brings money into the county. It's a way of life for a lot of the people there. The question is, how long do they want the water to last?
We are surprised when we run out of water, but we shouldn't be. And we need to, as a culture, have an understanding that water sustainability is important. And I think that awareness and understanding is not there. We're running up against the limits of our existing water resources. So we're in uncharted territory.
I want to know the trees, the fruit trees that I'm planting today, for my future, I'm going to have water, and so I want to invest in my future and know that I'm going to be able to pick an orange from my tree if I want to 20 years from now or 30 years from now.
The question is Arizona making a decision for profits today in what will ultimately be a big loss for the residents there in the future?